having a slightly out-of-body experience. And I should also say I'm method dressed for the occasion. So good evening, everyone. As we say in Ghana, all protocols observed. I'm always a little nervous about getting the order of salutations right, as we have diplomats, government officials, presidents, past presidents in the room, but our catch-all phrase works beautifully. You are all welcome. It is such an honor and a privilege to be here this evening. There are so many people to thank, more than a short acceptance speech will allow for. And forgive me in advance for doing this en masse rather than individually. There is one group to whom I owe an almost immeasurable debt of gratitude. Jonathan Hill, Kay Preston, Macy Hennessy, Iron Rensburg, Chilidzi Marwala, Darren Walker, Roberto Chikuto, David Ajay, Hanif Kara, Patrick Atta, and Victor Saki. Each has played a very special role in making tonight's award possible in ways that are sometimes too personal to describe. I want to thank the different teams that have worked with me over the past decade, particularly the Graduate School of Architecture, the African Futures Institute, and the Biennale. This has not been an easy or straightforward journey. I would like to thank the award nominators, Lanre and Tara, who initiated this incredible journey, the RABA team, especially Jessica and Carmen, who put this exhibition and event together, and who've shaped tonight's event, especially the outstanding film. Lionheart, you have my heart. And finally, the RIBA, or the RABA Honours Committee, not just for the work involved in the selection process, which is no small feat, but for their courage in selecting someone who could so easily be viewed as a politically correct choice, selected for what they represent, in other words, rather than who they are. The words, the first black woman, which walk alongside me like my shadow, really only make sense in a context where there have been few or no black women, or in a context where the color of your skin means anything other than a greater percentage of melanin. And to be fair, all of us, to a greater or lesser extent, all of us walk that fine line between representation and reality, not just those of us whose existence is often defined primarily by our proximity to the so-called centers of power. But what does any of that have to do with architecture? It is a complex and sometimes contradictory question, but the key that has always unlocked the mystery of where and how I intersect with this discipline, not as a cipher or a representation, but as a person who lives in the built environment and draws from it in order to create meaning, whether in a building, a drawing, a text, or a classroom, has always been love. Not in the everyday, commonplace sense of the word, I'd love a cup of tea, or I love what you're wearing, or I do love you so, but in a much older sense of the word in which several meanings, such as to be pleasing, to hold dear, or to be free, are fused. So tonight's short speech is a personal thank you and tribute to this discipline that has captured my heart, mind, and imagination for 35 years. It is the longest and most reliable relationship I've had. And although we've broken up several times, we are both still here, still standing and more or less in one piece. More than anything, architecture gave me tools. Tools to not only shape the world, but tools to explore it, to teach it, and last year in Venice, to describe it. It is hard to separate the business of being an architect from the business of being a professional. Above all, architects are professionals, distinct from laypersons, tradespeople, or amateurs. And nowadays we find it difficult to think negatively about the word professional. The very term is imbued with distinction, status, refinement, and learning. But if you look to its opposite, the amateur, another distinction emerges. The word amateur comes from Latin, amator, the one who loves and loves again. Unlike the specialist, the professional, the amateur can afford to lose. To my mind, it is the amateur in us that we must seek to encourage, not the professional. The one who loves and loves again, the one who tries and tries again, who pursues new ways of thinking, seeing, making, and doing without fear of failure. The amateur is my role model, not the professional. And for most of my career, that's been a hard circle to square. There have been many homes along the way: the academy, the building site, the novel, the institute, the studio, even the boardroom. Each of these spaces has offered something, if not the whole house, then at least part of it. I think of Kwame Anthony Appiah's In My Father's House, published in 1993, a metaphor for the impossibility of ever reconciling all the contradictions of history and humanity in a single space, a mansion of many rooms. 3 writers have shaped my worldview since my early teens: Gordimer, Morrison, and Malouf. Growing up in West Africa in the 60s and 70s without the distraction, and I use the word purposefully, of television, books were the only means through which other worlds could be accessed. Because so much of what we read, both in school and outside it, was written by others, about others, for others, I suppose I learned very early on that language, written and spoken, was both a means of communication, but also of travel, a way to experience other spaces and places, which were so far removed from my immediate environment that they might as well have been on the moon. The sensation of reading about the Griboyedov Canal being snowed over in 19th century St. Petersburg, whilst hearing the chickens root around for food in the midday heat in Ghana, has never left me. The alchemy which translates words on a page to images in the mind is so closely aligned with the alchemy of drawing on paper and then experiencing those spaces in a material sense that I see very little separation between my architectural life and my literary life. Same purpose, same process, different tools. And teaching has always been the bridge between the process and the outcome. A means of instruction, yes, but equally importantly, a means of exploration. I've said many times on balance that African, diasporan, and other students, those with more complex identities, including nationality, race, gender, sexuality, have produced the most original and compelling work I've encountered over the past 30 years, although I'm fully aware of the complexities of that statement. But I want to dwell on it for a moment because I think there's something in it that goes to the very heart of the issue and the very reason I'm being honoured tonight. The term decolonization applies to specific territorial contexts and to individuals, as well as institutions, buildings, frameworks, and so on. We tend to think of it as a process, i.e. decolonizing, and hope that one day we will arrive somewhere that is fully decolonized, although I find that quite hard to imagine what that place or future will look like. I often or mostly speak about writers or about the way writers have influenced me, but actually architects, poets, artists, sculptors, dancers, and filmmakers, to name a few out of many, all have had a huge impact on the way I work and practice. Borrowing from other disciplines is not unlike borrowing vocabulary or words from other languages, and it is in this context particularly that the ability or necessity of translation is particularly important. In the colony, to be bilingual is necessary. It is the condition of culture, communication, and progress. But the duality, the ability to speak more than one language, is also a potential catastrophe. The difference between one's mother tongue or native language and the cultural language you learn to speak is not peculiar to the colonized, but it cannot be compared to just any bilingualism. In the colonial context, possessing two languages isn't just a matter of having two tools. It means participating in two physical, psychic, and cultural realms which are in conflict. The native tongue, which is sustained by intuition, emotion, imagination, in which tenderness and wonder and the sublime are explored and expressed, is precisely the tongue you must forget. It has no stature. It is neither official nor public. If you wish to make a place for yourself in the world, you must forget your mother tongue and bow to the cultural language, the language of your masters. You discard the inferior language, hiding it from strangers. And in this context, an indigenous tongue cannot coexist with the dominant tongue. This is not a simple polyglot richness benefiting from another alphabet. This is a violent linguistic drama. I see little distinction between words and things, between images and spaces, between surfaces and form. They are all part of the many languages, including architecture, through which we understand, navigate, and shape the world. My own student experience, which I now see was unusual, allowed me to bring a language out of hiding. And as a result, I suppose I have always understood architectural education as a space of freedom, in the deepest, most liberating sense of the word, a space in which the linguistic violence that Memi speaks of may be resolved. It's a space of safety, of repair, of expansion and addition. It is the place in which we fashion the tools that allow people not only to shape their worlds, but to make new worlds, sometimes from scratch, but more usually out of the bits and pieces of the existing world that we outgrow or discard. And as David Graeber reminds us so powerfully, the ultimate hidden truth of the world is that it is something we make and could just as easily be made differently. This talk was addressed to architecture in the beginning, but its last words are addressed elsewhere, to a new generation of makers of worlds and words with whom I have walked and worked, particularly over the last decade. The students and young teachers of the Graduate School of Architecture, the practitioners whom I invited to Venice, the participants in the first ever Biennale College, some of whom are here tonight, I see you, and the participants to be of the Nomadic African Studio at the African Futures Institute, which kicks off soon. This is now your love story, stretching outwards in almost every direction imaginable, in ways that I simply couldn't have dreamt of 30 years ago. I want to end paraphrasing Toni Morrison. Over and over again, I am amazed by the treasure trove of these questions of race, identity, and heritage. How compelling is the story of all of us who take responsibility for all the values we bring to our work. And how stunning is the achievement of those who have searched for and developed a shareable language for the words to say all this and more. Thank you.